You know, if you happen to be one of the handfuls of people who can truly grasp how democracy really works in practice, and you know your way around, say, the political landscape and some basic economics, you will notice just how unbelievably bad the propaganda in the West really is. You know, when you look at some of it and you go, what kind of troglodyte spastic would believe this bollocks, let alone read it? It's like a tier level almost, and some bottom-of-the-barrel rags are so void of any substance or sense, you would shudder to think what kind of blue-head freakazoid bothers to read such worthless shite. Then again, that may as well describe the authors, come to think of it. So if you're wondering, what publication is Spoon trashing today? Is it Salon? It's probably Salon. It's Salon, isn't it? Why, yes, it is. See if I can pull it up here. Doom and gloom was the ultimate goal, and now it's working. Trump wins with voter apathy. For years, Republican politicians have been cultivating cynicism about government in order to depress voter turnout. You know, you can always count on Salon to be so stupid they can screw up an entire worldview through just a bloody headline. How the hell does that even make any sense? How would Republican politicians cultivate cynicism about government or depress voter turnout when they need people to vote for them to put them into power as well? If you can't get your voters to turn out, that is because you suck ass. Democrats had control of the House and the Senate and the White House when Biden attained higher office, shall we say, and then proceeded to 180 everything Trump did, and this is now somehow the Republican shenanigans to depress the vote. There is no logic to this at all. And then again, the author is an XX, so no logic shall be found here. At this point in election season, the political press starts making forays into the wilds of so-called real America to try and find out what the voters are thinking. You know, if you're only doing this now near an election season, I would like to know what the hell you idiots were doing for the rest of those years exactly. Representing the will of the people doesn't stop and start near an election season, by the way. The gig is consistent. Well, at least in theory, anyway. If they had issues 2 years ago that remain unresolved 2 years later, those are still going to be the same issues now. I should be a journalist. I could run circles around these monkeys all damn day. And I'm much funnier. It could be an interesting exercise in the hands of journalists who have a feel for more than the usual breakfast crowd at the diner type. Man, the elitist arrogance of stories, and find some insight that's helpful to understand the cross currents that shape the electorate in any particular cycle. All too often, however, it's just a series of cliches and conventional wisdom, unfortunately. Yeah, and if 2016 was anything to go by, you didn't listen to the breakfast crowd discussing the bread and butter issues. You were too busy trying to sniff the sagging ass of a Washington insider that repels anyone outside of their sphere. Why do you want to get into that sphere? Who the hell knows? She has this notorious reputation for making people, disappear, with the phrase that's become known as getting Clintoned. We see tons of coverage of Iowa and New Hampshire, for obvious reasons. But when it comes to picking the brains of swing voters, reporters always seem to head up to Wisconsin, the quintessential swing state. Back in 2020, just before the election, the New York Times sent a couple of reporters there to take the temperature of voters in the Badger State that former President Donald Trump barely won in 2016, to see what undecided swing voters were thinking 4 years later. They encountered people like this. Ellen Christensen, a 69-year-old Wisconsinite, said she voted for former President Barack Obama twice before backing Jill Stein, the Green Party nominee, in 2016. Now, Ms. Christensen said she was torn between Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden and could go either way. She said she was upset that Joe Biden hadn't denounced the Black Lives Matter protests strongly enough. As you can see, this is not a person who had what you might call a consistent political worldview. You see what I mean? They learned nothing from 2016. Not what you might call a consistent worldview. Lesson number 1. Do not insult the electorate. Now myself, by virtue of the Wang wisdom, would look at this and think, how on earth did a twice Obama Green Party far-left 69-year-old female voter at the age of 73 consider Trump, and why? Considering the age, the demographic, and prior voting affiliation, and a candidate that was consistently lambasted all over the press as the reincarnation of the funny Austrian man, that is insane. And is any of this going to alarm them? No, because they're idiots. The consensus formed by such dispatches was that though Biden was leading at that moment, people were moving towards Trump's law and order message. Geez, I wonder why that would be the case. In the end, Biden barely won the state by 20,682 votes, almost exactly the same margin that Trump had sneaked in with 4 years before. I love how there was absolute chaos, riots, over $1 billion worth of damage, and their reaction is, yeah, but how does this look politically? The devastation of the events, the damage to the social fabric, nah, that doesn't even register to these soulless demons. It just shows you the state of mind these creatures are in. 12 years before that, a young, up-and-coming journalist by the name of Chris Hayes wrote a fascinating piece for the New Republic describing his experience as a canvasser for the League of Conservation Voters Environmental Victory Project, that is a hell of a long name, in the race between Senator John Kerry and President George W. Bush. His insight from that unique perspective were very astute, ranging from the recognition that most undecided voters don't approach politics rationally. Yeah, you need to change that to most voters don't approach politics rationally, never mind the undecided ones, making it very difficult to appeal to them with the usual persuasion strategies, to the fact that a disturbing number of them were crypto-racist isolationists. Remember, this was 2004, long before MAGA was a twinkle in Donald Trump's eye. I would love to know who exactly was the demographic that was described as crypto-racist isolationists, especially in 2004 during the Iraq War. And bear in mind, I was only 14 years old, but that still makes absolutely no sense to me. Oh, this next bit is really interesting. He also found that these folks were very interested in politics, although they didn't enjoy it, and neither did they seem to be able to connect it to their own lives in ways that made sense. Hayes said he saw that the worse things got with the war in Iraq, the better George W. Bush seemed to do with these people. He explained, I found that the very severity and intractability of the Iraq disaster helped Bush because it induced a kind of fatalism about the possibility of progress. Progress of what exactly? Time after time, undecided voters would agree vociferously with every single critique I offered of Bush's Iraq policy, but conclude that it didn't really matter who was elected, since neither candidate would have any chance of making things better. He knows that this same logic applied to other issues, such as healthcare and the deficit. It's not that they didn't believe John Kerry could actually fix things, they didn't believe anyone could. They blamed politicians in general, so Kerry, by mere dint of being on the ballot, was somehow tainted by Bush's failures as badly as Bush was. I like that line, neither did they seem to be able to connect it to their own lives in ways that made sense. I wonder if the author realizes that line can apply to the relationship of Washington to the citizenry of the United States as well. Somehow I doubt that. Now, the logic of the undecided voters is very simple. They could tell there was no difference between John Kerry and George W. Bush. Both are products of Washington. The logic that these people had that was dismissed with such a distasteful cavalier attitude was the logic of those who've become far too wise to be swayed by the magic hand-waving that the author called usual persuasion tactics. Or to use a more accurate description, bullshitting. The pandemic and inflation have already rattled folks, and the broader political backdrop, the impeachments, Trump's torrent of falsehoods about the 2020 election. Yeah, don't kid yourself, Shorty. You people speak more about 2020 than he does. And you do so in a manner to instill fear into the minds of the voters by scaring the bejesus out of them, telling them that Trump is going to become this vengeful monster that is going to enact a hellish revenge on Washington. To quote Razor Fist, pause to suppress the erection. And there we go. The Capitol insurrection, the band of hard-right Republicans ousting their speaker, blah, 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 I don't care. Even as the economy grows at the strongest pace in 2 years, that's not really saying much though, and jobs continue to proliferate, signs of progress are easy to miss amid what voters see as screaming matches. Yeah, it would help if they turn off the view, maybe. Right-wing pandemonium is drowning out the normal politics these people yearn for. Yeah, that's what Biden was apparently voted for. How did that one turn out? And much like people holding Kerry as responsible for Bush for the debacle of the Iraq War, Biden is being held equally responsible for the nightmare that Trump has created of our political culture over the past 6 years. Again, no, he was elected to restore normalcy. Again, how did that turn out? This is a feature of right-wing politics, and it works like a charm. And yeah, don't worry, I will get to the stupidity in a moment. I will let them cook. I know, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It should also be noted that of all the states in the country, this Wisconsin electorate is not only inundated with national political bedlam, but their state politics are just as crazed. The last few years have featured wild gerrymanders, recourse radical governance by a legislative minority, and more. No wonder they're exhausted. As the Post reports of Wisconsin voters, they long for compromise. They want to feel heard and understood. Most Americans, for instance, desire access to abortion, tighter restrictions on guns, and affordable healthcare. Many wonder why our laws don't reflect that. There is a reason. Democrats back all those things, but Republicans block them. Voters may miss that order or operation, however, because they are tuning out due to the disorientating cacophony of right-wing lunacy. Okay, here is where I step into a tank and demolish everything I just read. Desire access to abortion, tighter restrictions on guns, and affordable healthcare. Here's an idea. Fuck less, learn to wield a weapon, and try not weighing 400 pounds of fat ass. Basically, try to be a more responsible society and not simply handing more power to the state. Then again, these are leftists. The only time they ever get laid is when they're being spit roasted by the state. Secondly, that's not something most Americans want. That is something leftist Americans want. I'm not surprised you can't tell the difference. You think anyone that opposes you is to be crushed under your heel because they're subhuman Nazi scum. There's no wonder Javier in Argentina said you don't negotiate with trash. Which brings us neatly to our next point. They long for compromise. I'll probably do a longer video on this subject at some point, but in politics, there is no such thing as compromise. There is no such thing as a middle ground. Politics is a zero-sum game. You either grant more power to the state or you don't. That's it. There's two sides, the absolute defensive no and the ever-hungry progressive gimme. If there's 50 things that the left wants and they get even one, they've won because they got something and the right didn't want to give up anything. That is the nature of the game. Nothing is more permanent than a temporary government program. It never gives up power, and it has an appetite that will never, ever be satiated. It will always want more. Secondly, you idiot, Republican voters do not want any of that crap. If the Republicans in office had a damn spine, they would block any of that because that is what their voters want. That is what they were elected to do. Heaven's sake, these people are thick. As David Roberts wrote in this excellent analysis on the platform formerly known as Twitter, just call it Twitter, you twat. This article could have been framed as the right's quest to make politics toxic and to destroy citizens' trust in basic political and media institutions is working, and that would have made it more clear. Yeah, because you definitely had no hand in doing that yourselves. But in the end, there is no way to ignore what Trump and his henchmen have done, are currently in the process of implementing in the States, and are planning to do in the future, God willing. It would be total malpractice to ignore it, but there's something deeper going on here, and clearly has been going on for some time. Trump may have taken it to another level, but for years, Republican politicians have been cultivating cynicism about government so that they can carry out their toxic agenda without being held responsible for it. They make politics ugly and uncomfortable so that people will see the whole endeavor as something inherently negative and unworkable. Yeah, it's called the American way. In this polarized environment, all they have to do is convince a small sliver of the electorate that this is the natural order of things and they can win it all. The Democrats and the press can't shirk from exposing the right's craven agenda, but they need to ensure that in the process, they remind people that it doesn't have to be that way. These people sound like a bunch of frickin' cheerleaders. What an absolute crock of shit. At no point do they discuss any pressing issues on the minds of the voters. Wonder why? So let me explain this very simply. 5 issues: war, crime, immigration, cost of petrol, cost of groceries. Biden is worse on all of those issues. Not a surprise considering the border and the campaign on ending fossil fuels, and then seems shocked when the industry would no longer invest their profits into the industry that he ran on ending. Is it any wonder why Biden's approval across the board is plummeting faster than when he does trying to walk up a flight of steps? Will be a mystery if you write for this godforsaken toilet bowl. Cheers for watching, and once again, I apologize for nothing.